Hello, everyone. We have another great guest here. We have Scott Robinson here, the CEO of Apex146, recent integration with Chainlink. We are really excited to have him to learn about what new types of data are now being able to integrate with your DApps and things like this within the broader Web3 ecosystem. So, Scott, super happy to have you again. Welcome to the Q&A.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Awesome. So just to get things rolling a little bit, for those who may not be super familiar with Apex146, can you tell us a little bit about what you guys operate with and what you oversee?
Yeah, so we're basically an analytics firm, and so I spent my whole career in the capital markets and commodity industry, and heavy analytics work, technology for the last 25 something years. And so I've always been pretty fascinated by really forecasting difficult events, right? Especially in the commodity space. So I'm also a very avid sports fan, especially in action sports. So what we decided to do is do a fun project. It was really started as a University of California, Santa Barbara internship program. And we were taking a lot of the methodologies and things I was doing in the commodity space, physical movement, and geospatial work, and we wanted to apply it to some of the sports that we liked, especially myself. And so I'm also an avid motorcycle road racing fan. I'm still the coach. I still coach road racing with N2 on the East Coast. And so we decided to basically do a predictive analytics project around MotoGP, which is the top level of motorcycle racing. It's very similar to Formula One, if people are typically more familiar with Formula One, but very large global audiences for these sports. So we're really an analytics firm, right? But our analytics itself, if you think about what we do, it was inspired by things like Moneyball, right? Moneyball in baseball, the Oakland A's. We're pretty much Moneyball for MotoGP, Formula One, MXGP, which is World Motocross, downhill mountain biking, World Tour cycling, and skiing. Alpine skiing, we're now moving into things like downhill, Super G, and giant slalom. So the common element on our business model is these are all timing-based sports. And unlike Moneyball, which is stick and ball sports, which is very easy to measure performance of athletes, in our sport, it's actually very difficult. It's all based on timing. And so you don't have the same statistics with these sports that you do in some of the other sports, which is one of the reasons why sports betting has not really taken off with these sports, because it's actually very hard to do probabilities around predictions on events. Everything's down to thousandths of a second. So we really embarked on this as a fun project, and it just turned into a business. And it's really pretty exciting work we're doing.
Very cool. So as you were saying, it's maybe a different type of measurement in terms of how we collect this data.
Right.
So can you elaborate a little bit in terms of where does Apex get this data? How do you collect it? And do you have any kind of standards for ensuring the high quality data that you wind up?
Well, this is the thing that's unusual about what we do is we actually don't republish data. We actually create data, right? And so our data is really created through a unique skill set that we've assembled. To do what we do, you actually have to have domain expertise around the topic. So that means professional athletes, people like myself, or others that are experts in these sports that we're involved in. And we actually have a great, a cadre of people that are experts across the different sports that we cover. But that is combined then with statistics and mathematics. That's combined with software development. And so what we're doing is we're basically modeling how an athlete makes decisions and how they increase and decrease in performance in these sports over time. And so as an example, in MotoGP, we have 17 proprietary indexes we've created around performance of athletes that basically we use a variety of different reference data pieces to do back testing and build our algorithms out. But in general, everything that we actually publish out to the world is unique to us and proprietary. And that's, in a sense, in the Chainlink side, that's why we're considered a sole source oracle, essentially, right? Because we are the ones that actually create the data, and we're the ones that can verify what happened. Verification of our events is pretty straightforward because you know the order people come in events. So from verification, it's actually it's very accurate. But what we're really doing is we're building probabilities around what's going to happen. And so it's not just what happened in an event, it's where it happened and why it happened, right? Which is a really important concept to understand when you're looking at the kinds of data sets that we produce. So aside from these domain expert software, mathematics, we also have meteorology, We have graphic design work we're doing in the NFT space. So there's a really interdisciplinary team that we've built over time to really be able to accomplish what we're doing.
Nice. And so, as you guys are creating this data, this new information, really to be applicable in different ways, like when you source this stuff, like what kind of challenges come up that maybe the average user may not necessarily think when they start to interact with the information you collect?
Yeah, I think the information's fairly straightforward to understand if you're involved in esports. I'll give you an example. In MotoGP, we created some indexes that had never been done in these sports. Predator prey indexes, which lead to efficiency and volatility around efficiency. Well, why predator prey? Well, because when you're racing, it doesn't matter whether it's in on motorcycles, in cars, whatever, you're either a predator or you're prey, and you're both typically in a race because people are passing. So you're chasing, you're being chased. And so there's a whole set of indexes we've created, like I said, 17 in MotoGP, about 14 for Formula One, which are really they're really mapping how an athlete in that sport is thinking in, milliseconds, essentially, because the speeds are so great. And so what we're doing is we're modeling in a sense how the thought process works, and that allows us to then understand better where the weaknesses are, where the strengths are with any given athlete on a specific track, on a sector of that track, in certain weather conditions with different track temperatures. So when you say data, well, there's a lot of, I'll call it, there's reference data we use to create our algorithms, but that reference data typically is public information, but is pretty diverse. So we have our own teams that actually handle everything inside on the data side. And so if we're using reference data, we're doing those collections ourselves. We're then actually going through and we're doing indexing work and creating indexes with the expert athletes. Then we're actually doing statistical models, and we're doing a lot of backtesting work. The backtesting work is done on historical events that have happened, right? Because we can go back in history and we can understand the performance of these athletes over time at very high resolution and pretty high frequency. So the ability to actually then go back and backtest these things is really important to being able to get it right. Right. And then our probabilities work out really pretty well, especially in things like sports betting.
Oh yeah, I mean, like the beauty of sports is that, to what you were saying earlier with Moneyball, that so much of it is quantitative when you look at the outcomes, right? And so in terms of the back testing, it makes the verification process potentially a little bit easier in some instances where you have precedent of outcomes and you could kind of benchmark too potentially.
Exactly. Outcomes are very, very clear, right? And so basically what our job is to really help people understand why things happen, where things happen, not just what happened, right? What happened is pretty easy, but it's kind of more of why these things happen and what that means for the future. So all of our indexing we do trajectories on things. We look at the performance of athletes over time. So if someone switches teams, that means they're switching machinery. That means that they're going to actually have an impact on their performance. They might actually slide down performance curve a little bit, and they plateau and come back up. So you'll see that, whether it's the weather conditions, the type of track it's on, all that data that we use on reference data, say around track, right, where we're collecting elevations, distance to braking, distance to, for acceleration points. And so all of these data sets really come together to help us basically build out these indexes and then test them properly. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think it's super cool. And I think you were even talking about some things, maybe it wasn't even intentional, but in terms of potential games that could even derive from this stuff in terms of the chase dynamic within. Yes. So I think a lot of enthusiasts as you're talking, could probably foresee, different types of things, especially if you're like a developer within the industry, different types of use cases potentially to make stuff. But before jumping into maybe some of the potential creativity that we could see within the ecosystem, I'm just curious, from your perspective and from your team's perspective, what inspired the team to bring this type of information to blockchains through the Chainlink network?
Well, it's a really great question. It actually started with us looking at a variety of different partnerships out with bet tech companies or with sports books. And I come from the exchange. I spent so much time in the capital markets and commodity industry. I spent a lot of time in the exchange world, right? And so I was really fascinated by some of the new exchange models that are being put out there for things like sports betting or political events or whatever that is. And it just so happens that some of the more innovative ones, I think, are on chain. So we were first attracted to Chainlink because we were super interested in Thales and Augur Turbo, the new sports book that Augur is putting out. Not that they're necessarily a great success yet, but we think that could be part of the future of where sports betting is going to go. So we wanted to be an early entrant into on-chain sports betting with the sports that we actually are involved in. To do that, we needed to be an oracle, right? You have to be able to, in that world, as you know, those are both aligned with Chainlink for us becoming essentially a single source oracle is the way that would work. And that way we can actually be a market creator, because not only do we do probabilities, but we actually build our own bet types. And one of the reasons why we do that is because the bet types that are done typically in the world, not by every, some have some interesting bet types in some of the books out there, but a lot don't. They're very vanilla generic, and honestly, the fan base isn't that interested in them. So we're able to do all kinds of combinations of really interesting bet types. We can do them pre-event, we can verify after event, and we actually someday, if when the blockchain can actually accommodate this, we actually do real time as well off chain right now. So we can basically build bet types during a race that are the most interesting, and we can actually update those things up to 5 times a second relative to the probabilities and the odds. So there's a wealth of things we could do. The question is, being an early, kind of adopter and moving on chain like this, we're the first ones to go on chain with our sports, with the exception of there's one other group that's doing some work around F1, but in general, no one's doing the other sports we cover. And what we do in F1 is actually very unique compared to anyone else.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, as you're talking about, why making this information available through the Chainlink network, some things that come to mind that I'm observing, at least broadly speaking within the industry, is around things like GameFi. So, I'm just even thinking as you're talking to me about this stuff, the potential of the gamification of this data to make it a more interactive and an immersive experience even. So with the frequency and the ability to bring this on potentially almost, as you're saying, in real time, could potentially breed a whole world of opportunities in terms of other user experiences with this type of information, which I think is super cool.
Yeah, in play has become, in the sports betting world, in play is becoming very popular. And so when we were working with different people out there looking at things we could do, people really wanted us to move not just do pre-event, but also do in play, which we do incredibly well. And it's very hard in our sports because these sports are literally thousands of a second kind of timing sports. So we've gotten very good at that side of it. But there's another reason why we actually think on-chain in Chainlink is so important. And this really came out when we were talking to your group about doing work in the sports betting side, but there's a bigger constituent base for what we do. There's a lot of interest on the media front, as an example, because our information, our probabilities, our stories we can tell around what's happening or what happened. We can identify why things happen and where they happen. We can also do forecasting work, which is really helpful for media. And so our sports are global sports. There's 1.9 billion people that watch Formula One every year. There's 430 million households that tune into MotoGP. There's 800, million people that watch, World Cup skiing. And so these are really large audiences. And so some of those might be prone to the kind of the sports betting community, but the whole bunch of others are really that spectator group out there. So we also were very interested in the media front and being able to do distribution on the media front for things that we can do that are very rich relative to being able to tell stories around things that happen with these athletes and what's likely to happen in an event. So that's another area that we're kind of going to pursue. So media, a big deal to us as well.
Yeah, so I mean, you're expanding on media here. I mean, are there other types of applications of this information that you could think of around, what developers could potentially build with this with this data that is now going to be available on chain?
Absolutely. So as an example, I'll give you an example of something we're doing, which maybe help spark ideas from other people of things they can do with our analytics work. And by the way, we think we're not really a consumer-facing company generally. We are doing some consumer work though, and I'll explain that in a second. But in general, we're very interested in hearing what people want from us, because in the case of things like sports betting, we can do so much more than we're currently doing relative to, tell us what you want relative to data sets around probabilities and things on events that are going to happen. And we can actually build those very rapidly. As an example, we do things like dream teams where we'll combine, out of 20 racers, we'll basically combine 4 groups of 5 that are statistically even. So you can go bet on a team versus just an individual in a race. That's stuff that we can do in real time as well. So it's not really a lot of constraints that we have based on the 4 years that we've been working with this. It's much more about what the market wants to consume from us and letting us know what they want to consume so we can actually do it efficiently and price it right in the marketplace. Moving into some of the fun things, we got engaged in the NFT space about 8 months ago. We knew nothing about it, honestly. So I had some attorneys come to me and say, hey, you should be involved in the NFT space. You have all this great information around performance and these athletes, and it's really exciting. And so we started doing our homework on it, and we realized that we could basically do some really cool games because we can actually take our performance of our athletes in our sports and we can create clones. And so we can basically clone real racing attributes into racers. And then basically they can actually be involved in a game where they actually enter and win money. They can actually reclone themselves with others for fees. They can basically increase in value because our clones actually will increase in performance or decrease based on how well you coach them relative to what you go into. So you don't play the game with your hands. This is all a strategy game relative to being able to take an asset and be able to apply it into races so that actually both win money, but also win points, which actually becomes valuable for the asset being traded in the secondary market. So we're very close to launching our beta for that game. And that game will start with the motorcycle side, and then they basically move into the open wheel. We don't call them the names of the sports for a variety of reasons, as you can imagine, but we are doing the, motorcycle road racing. We're going to be doing the open wheel right after that. And then we'll move into the other sports as well. So that's actually it's a really fascinating, fun project we've been working on for the last, say, 6 months, 8 months or so.
Yeah, it's super cool. So if I understand correctly, then it's not necessarily skill-based per se, but it's a lot about like the prep work or what variables you have control over before the simulation potentially would run. Or
it's really about understanding the performance of your athlete versus others relative to conditions, so that you can actually, as a owner, can actually place them, or a team owner or team coach, you can put them into the right races where they actually have a high probability of winning. So there's statistics and things that go along with this so that I understand better kind of how to actually place my athlete into the right places. The liveries and stuff we're doing are beautiful. We've got, amazing graphic design work, and the game itself is really coming along. It's pretty stunning the way it looks. So but it is based on all of the exact same assets we're using for all of the sports betting or media side. It really has to do with the ground statistics and the athlete performance statistics that are very rich, that allow us to do the cloning that we're talking about.
Gotcha. So like depending on like if they're better on certain terrains versus others, you probably would want to better identify, put your player in that lane, so that you can maximize performance based off of the historical. Right.
Yeah. That's correct. Based on historical. Well, so you have basically, if you think about a clone, that clone is born with a certain set of characteristics that are really, kind of different than the other one. As an example, I think we'll have, there's a lot of clones, like in the thousands. And so everyone's a one of one. There's no two that are identical. Not only are the liveries for the machinery not necessarily identical, some are similar, some might be identical, but the actual characteristics are all very different because our racers are based on indexing, and those indexes are at thousandths of a second, and there's no two that can be the same. It's pretty much impossible.
Right.
So basically everybody gets a one of one, which means that if they actually have a really nice one of one with great, liveries, which actually are high performing athlete, then that could be traded out on the market to someone who would actually be building a team. Plus, we'll allow people to build teams of open wheel, motorcycle racing, motocross, skiing. They race separately, but you can actually race them. We'll have the motorcycle racing, we'll have the car racing and all that, but I can actually own a race team across things. I mean, think about Red Bull, right? Red Bull has all kinds of athletes, right? Well, so how expensive is it to build race teams? Pretty expensive. So this allows everyone to basically play into the racing game, much like it really works in the real world, at an affordable price.
Mm. Yeah, lowering the barrier to entry really to participate in essence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's not just an NFT that you can trade and it's nice looking. It's one I can actually do something with and actually make money from. I can win money in my races. I can also clone someone with someone else, and I can get paid to basically let someone clone with me to create a new asset. And so the assets will populate over time. They'll increase in over time.
Yeah, man. So I'm just like I'm now starting to think as you're talking about this is like where will these games live? I guess if we start thinking about Web3 and blockchain based technology. So,
Right.
I know that for example, like hybrid smart contracts are what we view maybe as like the next evolution of what smart contracts can be, and that they can combine on-chain data with off-chain data and computation and stuff like this. So, how do you see the evolution of hybrid smart contracts playing out as it relates to the broader blockchain ecosystem in the next several years? Because it sounds like there's a lot of potential opportunity for the utilization of this type of data in a lot of different ways, depending on where it lives.
There is. I mean, because if you think about the architecture that we're putting together for our game, that's based on all of this great, performance information that we create. There's a whole bunch of that's off chain. To be able to then own an asset and trade that asset on chain is super important. And then to be able to go play a game that may be off chain, although aspects of it aren't, because you actually have to do payouts for people and everything else. So there's a fairly complex set of things. And we've learned a lot about smart contracts. We're still really new to it, right? We're learning about this. But I guess one of the things that I would say just as a business person is I kind of look at the next 5 years and say, well, the first thing we'd like to see is cross-chain interoperability, right? And so, and I know that you guys, I'm not that familiar with it yet, but I know you're creating a Chainlink CCIP, cross-chain interoperability protocol, which is important to us because we want to be able to allow people to be able to exchange their assets, to buy things, because our assets will be customizable. We'll be able to put new, stickers and liveries and sponsorships on the livery. You want that to be something that's really free flowing. We don't, over time, what would be really nice is to be able to have assets be able to move across chains so that they're not just in one place. And that what that does is it really allows people to kind of engage in, I think, a broader sense, right? It just, it's more flexible. And I like the way that you guys have described the CCIP of being similar to TCP/IP, right? Which is really kind of allowing intercommunication across these worlds, which is good for us in the kind of work we do, whether that's over on the betting side, whether that's over on the media side, or whether that's over on our the game area that we're working on as well. Now, I guess the other thing I'd say over the next 5 years is, and I'm relatively new to the world that you guys are creating here, but you can open the door to smart contracts being something that people understand. There's a larger percent of the population that kind of get it. I think right now people think of NFTs as a thing versus a contract, right? And so the being able to make it easier for people to understand this will engage them into being able to do things with smart contracts, whether that's for personal or whether that's for work-related things, right? And so it'll evolve to become much simpler and less ambiguous, right? And I personally think it'll be much less ambiguous in the paper contract world, which we live in today. It's a matter of time before people understand the language around this whole movement and be able to really understand how to leverage it for themselves. So we want to be a pioneer in doing some of that with the things we're working on.
Absolutely, Scott. And I think that some of the examples you've outlined, even in our time today, kind of give a foray into some of these potentially relatable use cases that are just beyond maybe the headlines or what people perceive as NFTs, but make it more relatable, that they could touch and feel and create something more with the technology, yes, but also the information that you're able to provide to bring it to life, which is super cool in my view. So, just for the followers and the enthusiasts, I guess generally, curious, Scott, how else can people learn about what Apex 146 is working on, things that you have coming in the pipeline?
The best way is to go to our website, Apex146.com. You won't see much about our NFT game on there right now. It's right. We've been keeping it fairly quiet, but we're about ready to launch going into our beta.
And so maybe a little bit of alpha in this conversation. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how much you've said, but yeah, maybe. Absolutely. I don't know.
Well, we haven't talked much about that outside, but I think that people will find it really interesting. But we're so close right now that we want to start getting momentum around getting, kind of our first drop done and getting momentum behind there and people playing with it. There's a couple things about that. We're trying to make it so that the assets themselves, the NFTs, are attainable by people. We don't want to make it so that it's just about, asset valuation going up through the roof and no one can actually play the game then. We really want to, we think we've solved some of the issues that others have had relative to making sure that you can keep broad participation and growth in the game itself. So we're thinking very long-term, not short-term, relative to making sure that people can play and actually really make it enjoyable and they can win. It's really kind of interesting. It's parallel to sports betting, but it's not sports betting because it's a game, right? You own an asset and you basically enter that asset into something, or you do something with it. So I personally find it a fascinating business model, and it lines up so much with the things we're doing with you guys at Chainlink. It lines up with kind of our whole vision in the beginning of what we wanted to create. It's just that if you asked us a year ago what we'd be doing NFT gaming, we would have said, "What? You're crazy." No, we kind of fell into it, right? It was it was very opportunistic, but it's super fun, right? Where the team is having a great time learning about this stuff and becoming real experts very quickly.
Absolutely, Scott, and I appreciate you guys leaning in as a early mover potentially in this space and trying to figure out how do we bring to life so much rich data and making it relatable, accessible, and reliable, quite frankly, and trustworthy based off of what you were explaining earlier in terms of the back testing and the validity of this information, so that we can build the next wave of really cool products. So Scott, again, thanks so much, man, for the time today. It's awesome to have your point of view around where you see things heading, not only just necessarily in the analytics and the sports sphere, but also as you see it relaying into the evolution of what's happening in Web3. So great to have you. I'm sure the enthusiasts are really excited to see what more can be built with this kind of information. And to the broader community, if you enjoyed this conversation with Scott and Apex 146, feel free to subscribe, like, and join us again next time with our next guest. So Scott, again, have an awesome day. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.